With me now to talk more about the Biden administration's approach to Iran and the nuclear deal is the former U.S. Secretary of State in the Trump administration, our good friend, Mike Pompeo. Mike, welcome back to the program.
Tony, it's great to be with you again. Thanks for having me on today.
Well, I want to start with the sanctions against Raisi himself. These were personal sanctions that were put in place in 2019 during your tenure. What was the motivation for those sanctions against him?
So, Tony, there were multiple sanctions against Abraham Raisi. You referred to him as the president. I suppose that's true. He was selected, however, not elected by the regime, by the clerical regime. There was no process. There was no true vote there. This man is the butcher of Tehran. He was sanctioned because he had overseen the death and execution of political dissidents in the numbering in the thousands back in what's called the massacre of 1988. He is a horrific human being, and we placed sanctions on him accordingly. He's also been engaged in all kinds of malign activity after that. He is truly part of the regime's kleptocracy, the theocracy. He is revolutionary in the way he thinks about Iran. And frankly, he's done a lot of damage around the world, but mostly he's done harm to the Iranian people. And we supported the Iranian people at every turn, and that's why the sanctions were put in place, Tony.
You go back to his election here, that he was anointed by the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and in fact, he's the one that put him in that supreme judicial role in which he oversaw the judiciary and the prisons in Iran.
That's right. He's clearly being put in place for a couple of reasons. One is he's a young man. He could well oversee Iranian policy for the next 20 or 30 years. The Ayatollah Khamenei is not a young man. He may well move off the stage in the next handful of years, and I think he's giving Raisi the chance to set up shop, to build out his Republican Guard credentials, to build out the revolutionary credentials, ultimately to likely be made the replacement for the supreme leader himself. That would be a horrific outcome for the Iranian people.
Let me go back to these sanctions for a moment, because this is something that in my capacity at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, we've watched these because of human rights abuses and religious freedom abuses, which Iran is notorious for. Did you notice what the press secretary, Jen Psaki, she sidestepped the question about the personal sanctions, but that's also in keeping with what Jake Sullivan said over the weekend when he was being interviewed by Chris Wallace. He, again, deflected when it came to the personal sanctions, saying we're not going to get into those because that's ongoing negotiations. Could the Biden administration, do you think that they would put on the table these personal sanctions against him in exchange for a nuclear deal?
Tony, it seems unimaginable to me that they would do this, but I've also watched this administration follow the Obama-Biden policies down a rat hole in other places, much like this as well. So I suppose it's possible. They are clearly thinking about it and don't know what they're going to do, because you're right, now they've had at least two public opportunities to respond to that question. And importantly, at least as this morning, the State Department comments on every election in every country. It was a good election, it was a bad election, it was a medium election. They haven't said a word yet about this farce of an Iranian election. That tells you that there are very few things that they aren't prepared to sacrifice for the Holy Grail, this article of faith that is the JCPOA. And when you listen to Raisi yesterday, he heard Secretary Blinken say longer and stronger about the New Deal, that it would be longer and it would be stronger. And what he said yesterday was, no way, not stronger. We're not going to talk about missiles. We're not going to talk about terror. That would be stronger. And we want you to rejoin the old deal. In other words, no longer. A clear pathway to a nuclear weapon within the next 9 years are the demands the Iranians are making. And if we hand them billions of dollars and lift sanctions on Raisi to achieve that, it would be cataclysmically bad for the region. It would be really bad for our friend and ally Israel, and present enormous risk to the United States as well.
Mike, when he says, Raisi even said he's not going to enter in negotiations with Biden, he's not going to talk with Biden. How does that communicate good intentions?
Well, this is a regime that is stubborn and is a theocratic, revolutionary regime. For the Biden administration to believe that they could lift sanctions, hand them a bunch of money, begin constructive engagement, and change the nature of the regime is farcical. They're not going to change. They have been moving rightward for the last 20 years. These are deeply committed revolutionaries, and protection of the revolution is what they will achieve at all costs. I don't understand how you can travel to Vienna and negotiate with someone like Raisi and his henchmen, how you can negotiate with a regime that provided weapon systems to Hamas, that launched rockets into Israel. But these are things that are, to ordinary Americans all across the country, make no sense whatsoever, and as a matter of national security policy, make even less sense.
Mr. Secretary, we're up against a break. Stick around. We're coming right back with more after this. Folks, stay with us. We're going to continue our conversation.
Where do you get your news? Do you have confidence you're getting the full truth? If you want to stay up to date on conservative news and are looking for Christian resources to help you stay politically engaged, then download Family Research Council's Stand Firm app. With all of our content available at your fingertips, you will conveniently be able to stay up to date throughout your busy day. The Stand Firm app will give you access to a variety of resources, such as our most recent radio programs, social media posts, and publications. Additionally, you will have the opportunity to take action and make your voice heard by contacting your elected officials on the issues that most concern you. Visit the App Store on your smartphone or mobile device and search Stand Firm to download Family Research Council's official Stand Firm app. Stay informed with a trusted source. Again, search Stand Firm to download the Stand Firm app.
As the political and cultural landscape of our nation has shifted in a concerning direction, it is so important for Christians to be equipped with biblical answers for the difficult questions of our time. That is why Family Research Council created our Biblical Worldview series. With the political left changing definitions to favor their narrative and to push their agenda, at times it can be hard to decipher what is true. That is why we must hold to the truth of the Bible, which stands the test of time. It holds the truth that does not change. Become equipped to stand firm in the face of cultural and political storms with FRC's Biblical Worldview series. This series dives deep into what the Bible says about some of the most crucial issues of our day. You'll learn what the Bible teaches on abortion, same-sex marriage, the separation of church and state, religious freedom, and the age-old question, should Christians be involved in politics? To access this series, visit frc.org/worldview. That's frc.org/worldview.
You're listening to Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins. Joining me, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Mr. Former Secretary, thanks for sticking around. I want to switch gears from Iran, which is obviously a big topic, very concerning, back to Russia, with the president having the meeting, President Biden having a meeting with President Vladimir Putin last week. And I want to play a very quick clip of a conversation, Chris Wallace asking Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, about the meeting last week with Putin.
In the summit, just to take one quick example, President Biden said, here are 16 areas of critical infrastructure I don't want you to attack, which seemed to imply, well, if you attack the 17th area of critical infrastructure, that's okay. Why didn't Biden say to Putin, look, no more cyber attacks, period, or you're going to face the consequences?
So first of all, it's pretty extraordinary to hear Donald Trump's Secretary of State talking about weakness in the face of Vladimir Putin when we all saw what happened in Helsinki. And the summit in Geneva was a study in contrast to what happened in Helsinki. Privately in the room, President Biden communicated to President Putin that there would be costs and consequences if harmful activities against the United States continued. Publicly in his press conference, he not only spoke out about that quite directly, mincing no words, but he also spoke about American values, something the last president never talked about.
Mr. Secretary, your response?
Well, the summits were very different, but summits are one thing, actions are another, Tony, and you know this. Rhetoric only matters to the extent you're communicating a policy that demonstrates American strength and American resolve. And we always did that. look at the actions that we took with respect to protecting America from the malign activity of Russians. I'd compare them to what the Biden administration's done and tell you that we've been much stronger, and I hope they'll get there. I want them to be successful. But to your point, he didn't answer the question that Mr. Wallace asked him. He was asked about the cyber threats, and President Biden said, "Hey, here's the target list: 16 things that you can't come after that really matter an awful lot to us." This is music to the ears of a former KGB agent. And I think they watched a president who wasn't prepared to respond forcefully in the very way that the Trump administration always did with respect to Russia, ranging from building up our military to providing defensive weapon systems for the Ukrainians. We spoke out on behalf of the Orthodox Church, which annoyed the Russians no end. All of these things were demonstrations of America's commitment to make sure that we secured America from the threats that Russia posed to us. I hope this administration will match those and exceed them.
When you look at what's happening off the coast of Hawaii, where Russia is engaged in the largest war game since the Cold War, it would suggest to me that they are trying the resolve of the Biden administration.
You'll recall, Tony, at the beginning of the administration, they did a similar thing in the western part of Russia as well, a massive troop force buildup there as well. I think the cyber attack on the Colonial Pipeline, too, and the Russian government's response to that saying, "Hey, not me. We don't control this." I think those are all things that are testing this administration. They've had two big successes already. They tested the administration on nuclear stability talks. Biden caved and gave them the New START treaty extension in exchange for nothing. They said, "We're going to finish our pipeline, our Russian pipeline." The administration said, "Fine, we'll lift the sanctions on senior officials that are close to Vladimir Putin so that you can finish your darn pipeline." I think they've seen that pushing this administration around is possible. I hope, I really do. There's no evidence of it yet, but I do hope that this administration gets this right. It's really important for each and every one of us.
Well, and I agree, and I thank you for your time, Mr. Secretary. And I would say this one point about everything I saw from the Trump administration, yourself included. American values always factored into the American First policy, and I'll just say one area is in the area of religious freedom that I know a little bit about. That was a key part of many, many summits that the Trump administration had with some of these foreign tyrants. So I think the record needs to be set straight on that one.
I appreciate that. It was always a priority for me and for my team to make sure that we did everything we could to expand the range of individuals, human beings who have their own dignity because they are made in the image of God, had an expanded capacity to worship in the way they saw fit. We made progress. There obviously, Tony, remains an awful lot of work to do, but it was a real priority for us.
Mike Pompeo, as always, great to talk with you. Thanks so